Do you believe that in just one single night, the entire world could turn upside down? The money in your hand loses value, the markets fall into chaos, and an empire that once seemed unshakable suddenly begins to tremble. That's not science fiction. It has happened many times over the past 500 years, and Ray Dalio, the legendary investor, calls this the changing world order. To make that less abstract, think about how quickly the rules can shift. One policy speech, one emergency decree, one surprise central bank move, and suddenly the scoreboard everyone trusted is rewritten. In moments like that, what matters most is not headlines, but the pattern underneath the headlines. His video, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, has more than 77 million views. For one simple reason, it reveals a cold, hard truth. Every empire goes through the same cycle. It rises, it peaks, and it declines. The question is, in 2025, where are we in that cycle? Ray Dalio once said that the events which surprised him most in the markets were not because they had never happened before, but because they had never happened in his own lifetime. The first time he realized this was back in 1971 when he was just a young clerk on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. On a Sunday night, President Nixon appeared on TV and announced that the United States would suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That was a historic shock. The end of the Bretton Woods system. Young Dalio thought the stock market would surely crash the next day. But instead, stocks skyrocketed nearly 25%. He was stunned. From that moment on, he began digging deeper into history. He discovered that something almost identical had happened in 1933 under President Roosevelt. And he realized everything moves in cycles. It only feels new because in our own lifetimes, we haven't seen it yet. If you've ever watched a storm roll in over calm water, you've felt this sensation. The surface looks familiar until suddenly it doesn't. Markets are like that. They look normal right up to the minute when the deeper cycle asserts itself. To understand it fully, Dalio went back 500 years studying the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, the American Empire, and even the cycles of China. He found that all great empires follow what he calls a big cycle with three phases: the rise, the top, and the decline. You can trace versions of this even further back, to Rome at its height and afterward, because the drivers are human. Incentives, institutions, and behavior repeat. The costumes change, the technology changes, but the script is strangely similar. When rising, empires have strong education, breakthrough innovation, booming trade, powerful militaries, and disciplined finances. They become the center of global trade, and their currency becomes widely used around the world. But when they peak, prosperity leads to complacency. The cost of maintaining empire grows heavier, inequality widens, social tensions rise, and most importantly, they borrow too much. They print too much money. When decline sets in, debt piles up. They print even more to solve it. Inflation rises, the currency weakens, people lose faith, internal conflict spreads, and eventually an external rival steps in to take their place. That's the uncomfortable rhythm. Strength breeds success. Success breeds excess. Excess breeds fragility. And fragility, when tested, cracks. To make it easier to imagine, think of an ant colony. At first, the ants are hardworking, carrying each grain of sugar back to the nest. That's the rise. When the nest is full of sugar, the ants are well-fed and comfortable. They let their guard down. That's the peak. But when the sugar begins to rot, the ants inside start fighting each other while other colonies see an opportunity. The nest begins to crack, and sometimes it collapses. That cycle of ants, nest, sugar, is the perfect metaphor for what Dalio calls the big cycle. And just like real ants, humans are great at habits. When times are good, we assume they'll stay good. We build routines around abundance. Then abundance masks small cracks, until it doesn't. Over the last 500 years, we've seen the Dutch Empire with the guilder, the British Empire with the pound, and the American Empire with the dollar. Each had its golden age, and each gradually lost its edge, making room for the next. And right now, China is rising with trade, technology, and military power. What Dalio makes clear is simple. History is repeating itself. According to him, three forces are now happening all at once. First, massive debt and relentless money printing. Second, deepening inequality and political polarization. And third, the fierce rivalry between a rising power, China, and the leading power, the United States. These were exactly the same ingredients present before world orders changed in the past. So, if we look at 2025, what do we see? First, the story of debt. As of September 2025, U.S. federal debt has surpassed $37.4 trillion, over 100% of GDP. This year alone, the budget deficit is projected at $1.9 trillion. The Trump administration has just passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a tax cut package that will add another $2.4 to $3.4 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. This looks eerily familiar if we compare it to Britain after World War II. Massive spending, soaring debt, and growing reliance on borrowing. Debt by itself isn't destiny. What matters is the path of interest costs versus growth. But when interest costs rise faster than growth, the math tightens like a vice. That is when policymakers reach for the oldest tool in the drawer: debase the money, stretch the debt, hope growth catches up. Next is inflation. Though it has cooled from the 2022 peak, inflation in America is far from solved. The PCE index in April 2025 stood at 2.1%, but housing services alone were up 4.2% year over year. The Fed has tried to contain it by keeping rates high and only recently cut by a quarter point on September 17, 2025. The dilemma is obvious. Hold rates too high for too long and the economy weakens. Cut too soon and inflation roars back. It's the same trap we've seen in history, often ending in crisis when governments take the easy way out, printing more money. Think of it as steering between two cliffs. On one side, recession. On the other, reinflation. The wheel is sensitive, the wind is shifting, and every small turn has consequences for mortgages, small business loans, and the job market you and I actually live in. Third, internal conflict. Inequality in the U.S. is at its highest since the 1930s. Studies show the wealthiest Americans now control more than 70% of assets, while most households live under heavy debt, burdened by rising housing costs and expensive health care. Politics is polarized, left versus right, with debates over taxes, welfare, and immigration more explosive than ever. This is exactly the signal Dalio described. When the ants in the nest fight over sugar, the nest shakes. Social fabric matters economically. When trust slips, investment slows. When rules feel unfair, people disengage. When the center cannot hold, extremes compete to rewrite the rules. Markets can price earnings. They struggle to price broken trust. Finally, the external rival. China is advancing rapidly, from AI, semiconductor production, to global trade. Its expanding influence in Africa, Latin America, and across Asia-Pacific. If we compare, China today looks much like the United States after 1945. Surging manufacturing, booming exports, fast innovation, and steadily challenging the leading empire. Rivalry doesn't always mean war. Often it means tariffs, tech restrictions, capital controls, and friend-shoring. But those frictions still tax growth and raise prices, another quiet way the cycle advances. So the big question, will a crisis hit in the coming years? And if so, when? Several scenarios exist. One is that the U.S. keeps printing money to pay debt, inflation lingers, the dollar weakens, while gold and commodities rise. This echoes 1971 and 1933. Another scenario is a financial recession where households and businesses buckle under high borrowing costs, credit tightens, and small banks fail. That could unfold by late 2025 or 2026. A darker scenario is a sovereign debt crisis if the world loses faith in the dollar. That's less likely right away, since the dollar is still the reserve currency. But if current trends continue, such a shock could arrive by the end of the decade. There's also a middle path, a slow grind decade, lower growth, rolling mini-crises, periodic money printing to patch holes, where the crisis is not a single explosion, but a series of waves. In some ways, that path can be more exhausting because it tempts people to relax between waves. Of course, history never repeats exactly. 2025 is different in some key ways. The pace of change is faster thanks to technology and globalization. The rise of digital money, stablecoins, and the Chinese yuan playing a bigger role globally adds new complexity. And Trump's administration is different too, with America First policies, higher tariffs, and domestic production priorities. That may help certain industries, but it also raises consumer costs and imports inflation into the U.S. At the household level, this shows up in simple places: the price of a cart of groceries, the rent renewal notice, the interest rate on a car loan. Macro stories are lived as micro decisions. Do I save more cash, fix my mortgage rate, or delay that big purchase? So what should Americans do? Dalio would say, diversify, hold real assets, and don't rely solely on the dollar or domestic markets. Americans need to protect themselves with gold, commodities, and international exposure. And for those outside the U.S., caution is even more important since dollar swings directly hit exchange rates and domestic inflation. Holding gold, strong foreign currencies, and taking advantage of supply chain shifts could be crucial. Practical translation: reduce fragile debt, build a cash buffer, avoid one-bet portfolios, and own things whose value doesn't depend only on printed promises. Balance offense and defense so you can stay invested without being one shock away from panic. Think again of the ant colony. If a nest keeps all its sugar in one single chamber, when disaster strikes, everything is gone. But if the ants are smart and split the sugar into 3 chambers, one for safety, one for growth, and one for emergencies, the colony survives. For us, it's the same. Build 3 buckets for your finances: a safe bucket with gold and defensive assets, a growth bucket with long-term investments, and a reserve bucket with cash and flexible options. This is less about predicting headlines and more about designing resilience. You can't time the storm, but you can decide whether your roof leaks. In the end, Ray Dalio has handed us a map, 500 years of history condensed into lessons. And this map is flashing red in 2025. Massive debt, money printing, internal division, and a rising external rival. History seems to be repeating. The question is not whether a crisis will happen, but when, and whether we're prepared. From what we see, the danger zone is late 2025 through 2026, when today's policies start to reveal their consequences. And as Dalio said, the most important thing isn't predicting the exact day the storm hits. It's being ready, so that whenever it does, we can stand firm. So, have you divided your sugar into 3 buckets yet? Have you fortified your ant nest for the coming winter? Because the big cycle spares no one. It doesn't ask if winter will come. It only waits for the time to repeat. If we know this ahead of time, we won't be caught off guard. We'll face it calmly, and we'll get through. And you see, history isn't far away. It's unfolding right in front of us, only dressed in modern clothes and powered by new technology. From the Dutch to the British to America today, the changing world order always ends with the same question: are you prepared? If you want to keep exploring the parallels and possible scenarios of 2025, watch the next video I've linked right here. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, like, and share this video, because one decision at the right time can completely change how you protect your future and your family. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Remember, every ant colony has its winter. The real question isn't whether winter will arrive, but whether your nest is strong enough, with enough sugar stored to make it through. I'll see you in the next video.